You know, we all kind of think we know the story of the English kings, right? It's all chaos and battles and bloody successions. But what if I told you it's not random at all? What if, hiding beneath all that drama, there's a secret code, a mathematical rhythm so precise it makes you question everything you thought you knew about history? Sounds pretty wild, I know, but let's dive into it. So, here's the big question for today. Is that long, messy list of English monarchs just random? You know, just a product of luck and wars and who happened to be born to whom? Or are we looking at something else entirely? Something that feels a little too perfect, maybe even designed?
I mean, at first glance, yeah, it looks like total chaos. Just look at this thing. It's a jumble of names and houses, Anglo-Saxons, Danes, Normans, Plantagenets. Dynasties rise and then get brutally overthrown. It seems like the very definition of messy, unpredictable history. But what if it isn't?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The research we're digging into today suggests that if you know where to look, an absolutely astonishing pattern starts to emerge from all that noise. A regularity that is so precise, it's almost impossible to explain away as just a coincidence.
Okay, so let's zoom in. We're going to start our count with King Edward the Elder, way back in the year 899. Now, the sequence of kings that follows him seems pretty normal. But hold on, because the first clue to this whole puzzle is hiding right in plain sight. A truly remarkable pattern just snaps into focus, but only if we make one very specific tweak to this timeline, one single change that unlocks the entire sequence.
And here's that change. The whole theory hinges on the idea that the Norman dynasty, William the Conqueror and his crew, was a kind of break in the timeline. So the theory says, let's just set them aside for a moment. Just take them out of our count. So what happens when we do that?
Okay, prepare to be amazed, because this is wild. Starting from Edward the Elder, and skipping those Normans, every seventh king is named Edward. I'm not kidding. Not sometimes, not most of the time, every single time. The seventh king is Edward the Martyr, the 14th, Edward the Confessor, the 21st, the 28th, the 35th, and the 42nd are all named Edward. The mathematical precision is just perfect, like clockwork, all the way up to Edward IV in 1461.
So you gotta ask, why? Why this name, and why this perfect rhythm of 7? This can't be just a fluke. And the source material we're looking at suggests the answer has nothing to do with politics, but everything to do with faith.
The whole key lies with the first two Edwards in our pattern. You have Edward the Martyr, a teenager who was assassinated, and almost immediately miracles were being reported at his tomb. He became a saint. Then, a century later, you have Edward the Confessor, who is famous for being incredibly pious. He's the one who founded Westminster Abbey. So these weren't just kings, they were seen as saints. In medieval England, that gave the name Edward a massive amount of spiritual power and authority.
So the argument here is that this repeating pattern isn't random in the slightest. It's anchored to the powerful idea of sainthood connected to that name. Edward was a name that meant piety, legitimacy, and divine favor. So to have it reappear in such a structured way, well, that would have been an incredibly powerful symbolic statement. But the rabbit hole goes way deeper. The Edward pattern isn't some lonely anomaly. It turns out, once you start looking for these kinds of regularities, you start finding them woven all through the timeline.
Just look at the dynasties themselves. Before the Norman conquest, you see a block of 4 Danish kings, followed by a block of 4 Anglo-Saxon kings. And after the Normans are out of the way, the powerful Anjou Plantagenet dynasty has exactly 8 kings. These really neat symmetrical blocks of 4 and 8, they just feel less like the messy outcome of war and more like a planned structure.
And there is so much more. For instance, the first 2 kings named Henry after the Norman period, they both reigned for exactly 35 years. To the day. It's a remarkable parallel. We also see that 3 of the 4 dynasties after the Normans start with a King Henry. You get name sequences like Henry, then Edward, then Richard that seem to repeat. Even the total time on the throne lines up. The combined reigns of the Lancaster Henrys and the Tudor Henrys both add up to an identical 62 years. The list of these so-called coincidences just keeps on growing.
So you have to ask yourself, at what point do you stop calling it a coincidence and start asking if it's actually evidence of a deliberate design? And this question leads us to the most provocative part of this whole analysis, a direct challenge to the official historical record as we know it.
This line of thinking points to the research of a historian named Edwin Johnson, and he put forward a pretty radical theory. He argued that much of the Middle Ages, basically from 700 to 1400, wasn't recorded as it happened. He believed it was a later fabrication by Christian chroniclers who filled it with made-up stories and even fictitious people. This idea is called historical fabrication. It suggests that early historians weren't just reporters writing down events. They were more like authors, composing a story. They were creating a history that made sense, that had these pleasing symmetries and repeating themes, almost like a piece of literature.
And this is where it all connects. That perfect every seventh king rule, then neat little symmetrical dynasties, those identical reign lengths. From this perspective, these aren't miracles of chance. They're the fingerprints of the authors. They are potential evidence of a history that was written, not lived.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty unsettling question. The patterns are there, hidden in plain sight, right in the official record. But if this history really is a composition, a grand story with a secret structure, who wrote it, and why?